Jill and Stacy Show.
Most of you all know him. This is Senator Chris McDaniel, Chair of the Kentucky Senate Budget Committee. He is, I would say, one of the large reasons why we continue to get tax cuts to our state income tax because of responsible conservative budgeting. So, Senator McDaniel, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Liam. Thanks, Richard. And, thanks to all of you. A lot of you, or some of you in here probably walked and helped out in the last campaign, and that's so important. I think that for those of you that are new to this, there's probably no more effective grassroots conservative organization nationwide than AFP. It is a monstrous organization, and they get out there and they do the basic blocking and tackling of campaigns, right? And that is just, you can have all the technology you want, you can have all the everything you want, but at the end of the day, there's nothing that converts a voter like standing on a doorstep. And that's what AFP does best. So thank you for everything that you do for that. So I'm going to talk about three things briefly and then take questions more broadly. So what are we going to do? The first thing we've already started, and we'll finish up when we go back, is the tax reduction to 3.5%. Why do I say when we go back? So there's two types of sessions in Kentucky, the long and the short, and forgive me, some of you really already know this, but this is what's called a short session. These sessions have only been in place since about 2000 when there was a change to the Constitution. And so we have 30 days that we can take legislative action during odd numbered years like this. During even numbered years, we have 60 legislative days to take action, and there's actually the only constitutionally mandated tasks occur during that, and that's the passage of the state's budget and the state's road plan that we do during the even numbered years. I chair the Appropriations and Revenue Committee, so I oversee all taxes, tax incentives, and budgeting for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. TJ. So that's my role, and as such, we put in place about 4 years ago what's been our approach to comprehensive tax reform. So there's a general overarching philosophy that consumption taxes yield better economic growth than production taxes do. And so what translated, the sales tax is a more efficient way to handle taxation than an income tax, all right? And this is not unique to Kentucky, this is not unique to the United States. In fact, even the European Commission, for the liberal leanings that they have, encourage developing economies to focus on consumption taxes rather than production taxes because they simply are a better driver of the economy. So to that end, we started down the path of tax reform. When Matt Bevin was governor, we made a first pretty big bite from 6% to 5%. But we wanted to do something that would be more sustainable. You'll recall we were coming right out of a time where Kansas had recently gone through a failed attempt at tax reform, and we had the opportunity to learn a lot of lessons from that. And I'm going to talk in a second about some people who didn't learn lessons from that. But the essence of the Kansas reform was there was a tax cut, but there were supposed to be corresponding spending cuts. Tax cuts are always easy, right? That's a pretty simple vote. Everybody wants lower taxes. So they did that, but when it came time to do the spending, they stripped that out of their overall plan and only did the tax cuts. Well, what happens? Fast forward 18 months, all of a sudden they blow a hole in the side of their budget, right? Now, in private industry, like I'm in, when you don't have enough money coming in, you have to rein it back in, and you just make those hard decisions. In the public sphere, when you deal with things like public opinion, all of a sudden you find more difficulty in doing that. And Kansas found that. They had to reverse a lot of what they were doing. They lost a lot of the long-term momentum that they had. And so consequently, they basically torpedoed their own package. We didn't want to do the same thing. So what we did is we put in place basically a three-step system that would reduce the income taxes by half of a point. So we were already down at 5, we went from 6 to 5, and then we made the leap from 5 to 4.5, 4.5 to 4, and now we've met the triggers, as we refer to them, to go from 4 to 3.5. TJ's already taken his vote on the floor on that. I've taken my vote in committee. When we go back, we'll vote on the floor, send it to the governor, where it looks like he's going to sign it for real this time. So, yeah, exactly, right? Not just let it go in law without a signature. So that's what we're going to do there. So people who didn't learn the lesson, we're seeing some really interesting things right now over in West Virginia. West Virginia has got a pretty massive budget hole that was just announced about 2 weeks ago with their new governor. What they did is rather unwisely, so they're very reliant on minerals, and minerals have tremendous fluctuations. Any state that relies on minerals has tremendous fluctuations in their receipts. We used to have a big mineral tax in Kentucky, but with the decline of the coal industry, it's basically a non-existent part of our budget. But what they did is when their mineral tax spiked as natural gas prices went up, they cut the income tax. Well, when it made its natural fall, they've now left themselves with a pretty sizable hole in their budget. And they don't really know exactly what they're going to do to make that up, but they're taking some pretty substantial beatings. There's some things going on in Mississippi right now that could prove problematic for those guys. They got a tax reform package out of the House, but getting it through the Senate, we'll see how that goes. But once again, it could present them with some pretty substantial problems. So that's taxes. I am the finance nerd, okay? I find this stuff fascinating. You guys are about ready to fall asleep. But it's kind of, to me, there's nothing more important that we do outside of a few very basic fundamental individual rights issues. There's nothing more fundamental that we do than dealing with money. I spend your money, unfortunately, and trust me, I want less of it to spend, okay? The dollars in an economy are best spent when they're in people's pockets making individual level decisions. And I will always believe that, but I do find this stuff fascinating, and it's what I really enjoy. The next thing, more personally to me, that I'll be pushing for is a reform to the way that the Commonwealth does pardons. We, exactly like the federal government, have an unlimited executive power to issue pardons and commutations. I started this after the Bevin pardons in 2019. We saw murderers, rapists, and others pardoned, drug dealers, things like that, and it was really pretty embarrassing, and also it was just a fundamental travesty, right? I mean, you have a justice system set up for a reason. What is the fundamental charge of government to deliver justice? And one person can short circuit that. We've now seen it on the federal level, right? I mean, President Biden literally, I think it was like 13 minutes left in his administration, and he's still pardoning people, right? I mean, it's just ludicrous. And the fact that one person can short circuit an entire justice system is just crazy. I don't actually get rid of the pardons and what I'm wanting to do, but what I do, it's a constitutional amendment, right? So it will go to the voters to vote on. And it basically say 30 days before a gubernatorial election, and then from the election until swearing in, there's no pardon power, right? And so what that allows is the people would have to know, or they would have time to know, hey, look at what this guy did, right? Because it would really decrease the likelihood of someone getting votes if they were pardoning rapists and murderers, and people had the opportunity to go to the ballot box. And so that's that one. Lastly, Richard had mentioned, maybe Liam did too, that one of the things that you guys are really working hard on is this REINS Act. Who'd you say is filing that?
Wade Williams.
Wade Williams? Okay. So, regulations in need of scrutiny, basically kind of the administrative state, right? How do you rein that in? How do you keep that under control? That's the essence of the REINS Act. We've done something very similar on the financial side of things. So we have what are called tax expenditures, right? And a tax expenditure is any time something is exempt from taxation, right? And so some of these you don't even think about. They seem fairly common sense. But we exempt residential utilities, we exempt groceries, we exempt pharmaceuticals, we exempt health plans, 401k contributions, on and on and on. Some of them are a lot lesser things in there, but those are kind of the big personal level ones that you think of. And we started about, when did we start doing this? Maybe 7 or 8 years ago, putting sunsets on all of these things, right? Because a lot of times things just kind of become baked into everyday life, like a lot of the regulations that we talk about. All of a sudden you're not thinking about them anymore. And the next thing you know, it's like, well, why did we ever do this? And so understanding the efficacy and the rationale and the effectiveness of something is important to what we do. And so we kind of have our own financial variant of that we do in the Kentucky General Assembly on a regular basis. So with that, question about licensure and boards and stuff like that. So you raise an interesting point in that. And this was one of the ongoing conversations that John Schickel and I always had, right? Because, you know, when you allow licensing reciprocity, which is a very good thing, and I think I've always voted for any time we have licensing reciprocity, there becomes this question of to what, because you then deal with an interstate compact, right? To what degree are you yielding state sovereignty to either another state or an overarching organization as part of a compact to allow the licensing reciprocity to occur? So there's always this kind of tug back and forth on the licensing things. Like I say, I've always kind of voted for it because to me it's kind of a competitiveness thing, and why should you be paying dues in multiple states and on and on. But that's kind of the bigger overarching debate that occurs in licensing reciprocity.
Asking you a question about cart before the horse in terms of businesses coming in, making routes, but as we were talking about, have not yet addressed housing or roads. And county attorney, I always thought that was Jordan, so I'm a little bit, there was the gentleman there.
He's the
So,
Commonwealth attorney.
Oh, that's why, that's, okay, Commonwealth
He's
attorney.
the Commonwealth attorney, yeah.
Right, so I had never heard this, says, well, so many factors. One of them, you do get a little revenue as a county from the licenses, occupational licenses that might come with that business. That's all I wanted to know.
Okay.
I didn't know that, so I thought that was interesting, because I'm trying to figure out why growth all the time. I find it very complicated, but.
Yeah, no, and you know, growth is a good thing. Growth does give you opportunities, new employers, frankly. So let me go to a micro level. So I own McD Concrete over here, right? We are a very base level employer. You know, we have lots of labor intensive tasks and things like that. When Amazon came in, right, they located about 2.6 miles from my house and employed over 2,000, or from my office and employed over 2,000 people. What that did by them being there, and of course our unemployment rate is exceptionally low around here, our labor force participation is exceptionally high, it raised wages dramatically in the area. And that was good on the individual level, right? Because it gives people the opportunity to earn more money. Now, obviously the overarching thing that we've really seen is as we have more people come in, as we have a decline in the labor availability and things like that, houses get to be more expensive. And so there's kind of a cyclical thing here, and there's always that equilibrium to be struck between growth and inflation. And certainly allowing the free market to do its thing is by and large the best way to handle that. But yes, occupational licenses, occupational taxes do go a long way. Be they the corporate level that you pay, right, just for your regular occupational license to operate in a given locality, or the occupational taxes, which you might also call payroll taxes, that end up in the county revenue stream. Yeah.
Oh, was it last week that you all had the meeting? And I think you started off talking about what you said earlier tonight about, well, if you're going to say you're going to cut taxes, well, you got to, otherwise it's just posturing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how you
Yeah.
put it.
Yeah.
It was interesting. So if we think about funds being appropriated from the state to the county, can you just name a few directions that takes? Now, we know roads,
Right.
you know.
So
what are some other things?
So that's well, depends on how you want to look at appropriated to the county, right? So roads is going to be your big one, right, and your obvious one. There's also water and sewer monies that flow down in various pots. You also have things like Medicaid, right? Medicaid monies flow to individuals. Your traditional benefits that you think of flow to individuals in the counties. You've got, what else ends up back there? Your education dollars, like the SEEK formula, right, that sends monies back into the schools, on and on and on. So there's a lot of that occurs.
Well, my question, we were speculating before this started. I'm like, there's got to be so much behind the scenes I'm just utterly clueless about. So how much leverage does that give? Okay, so we know, let's say the federal government. We can talk about the Commerce Clause, other things that the federal government utilizes in order to dictate you know, with different levels of sovereignty, right, national, state, local,
Sure.
to dictate, they could say, you're gonna do it this way, or we're gonna pull that away, right? So they find their way around lack of actual constitutional authority. How much does the state do that? And I mean that as a genuine, well, how much does private equity coming from outside of Kentucky end up in, say, Boone County, because the county wants to satisfy the state by doing things that create more revenue generation for the state coffers. And now that you've done that for me, I might be a little more attentive to your roads. A little bit of kind of a quid pro quo.
Yeah, you know, you really don't see it too terribly much at the state level, and I'll tell you why. We're very, very different from the federal level because, first of all, our executive is not quite as powerful as the federal executive has the potential to be. We don't have as much money as the feds have, and we all have to go home, right? I mean, I've got to come back and run a concrete company and a cattle operation, and my kids play basketball with everybody in the community, which is where I'm going after this, to pick kids up from basketball, right? TJ's got to run a law practice, take your pick, we're all in the community on a regular basis anyway, and we simply have to work more cooperatively. So now, I will say there are programs that are structured for growth areas, but it has to be demonstrable, right? Like, hey, the one that really has just been going crazy is Warren County with Bowling Green, right? I mean, they're just blowing out at the seams down there right now. And so they're actually getting a lot of attention because their infrastructure is struggling to keep up down there with a lot of different demands on it. So it doesn't happen necessarily in that way. Now, I mean, I'm sure there are things that happen in the executive branch, and we've seen some of those, but we, by and large, can rein a lot of that back. I mean, the fact that, so Kentucky's weird because we lose constitutional authority on particular dates to really rein things in, right? So the way the Constitution is written is the first Tuesday after the first Monday, we go into session, and then we've got until April the 1st in short years and April the 15th in long years, where we really have the authority to override things the governor's done, right? So our ability to bring things back in, especially with super majority Republicans, is pretty tremendous. So I mean, I'm sure there's some arm twisting we don't like, but it doesn't happen nearly to the capacity that you think about from the feds. Now, the other way, and this is always dangerous, right? I watched the previous governor, Beshear, do this, and it taught me a lesson. So when I came in, he was getting money from the federal government for an expanded low-income child care thing, right? And then the feds took the money. It was a temporary program, right? Well, he puts it into place. They pull the money back, and basically we just get lambasted over, you're taking child care away from people, and blah, 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 right? And at the end of the day, there wasn't nobody was taking child care away from anybody, but when the money came out, it caused a problem in the General Assembly, and so consequently the vote was to leave it in, right, so that the program continued even though the money wasn't there. And that's another way that the feds do it. It's kind of the reverse of what you're saying. Mm-hmm. If you do this, then we'll give you that. More, we'll give you this, then we take it away, then it becomes a state budgeting problem, right? So, yeah, it definitely happens from the federal level. I can attest to that.
First of all, you mentioned the reciprocity about these licenses and all that. I know many military spouses, for example, when they're moving, and we have Fort Campbell, we have Fort Knox, to a lesser extent, the Bluegrass Storage Center, where military spouses are going back and forth as part of their usual rotations, and it becomes very hard for them to have the licenses because they get licensed in Texas, for argument's sake, and then they come to Kentucky, and all of a sudden they have to relicense. And it becomes a point where if they've got to do this every 2 or 3 years, why bother? They just become stay-at-home spouses. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of an issue for them.
Right, yeah. And we've got a lot of, we just did another one last year for military spouses. We do a lot of work for military spouses on, I think we've done nursing, we've done cosmetology, we've done several of those trying to get rid of the issues that they have. I don't think we did a blanket one though. I'd have to go back and look. Sorry, not the
That's
world's
all right.
greatest
You
memory.
just sparked my interest when it was mentioned before.
Yeah,
I think.
for sure.
The other one, and I'm sure TJ knows that I'm going to ask this already. There seems to be a drain on resources because of illegal aliens in the state. It creates an unfair competition because they accept lower wages, and then normal Kentuckians have a hard time competing with them. And on top of that, there's the taxpayer drain with their children in our schools as well. And with the current administration just moving in, I'm sure you're aware of what they plan on doing. It seems like Kentucky needs to become shoulder to shoulder with the federal government by doing things like requiring E-Verify across the state regardless of the level of business, and also passing a Kentucky version of House Bill 56 in Alabama as well.
I'm not familiar with what that is.
Well, basically, it requires businesses to report illegal aliens and also keep tabs on them in schools too.
Yeah.
It's my opinion, granted this is an opinion, that no child should be going to school in Kentucky unless at least one parent can verify residency and citizenship.
Right, right.
Otherwise, we've got this tax drain going on in our schools, where we really need to put our resources towards actual paying citizens rather than people that are here illegally.
Right, no, and I completely agree with you, right? And I'm glad that we're going to be cracking down on the illegal portion of it, and I'll tell you why. I employ a lot of immigrants in my line of work, and I can guarantee you could come in and open the folders and every I is dotted and every T is crossed.
Don't be
and
wrong,
everyone.
some of my best soldiers when I was in the military, they were immigrants, and
Right.
I was happy to have them, but the illegal immigrants are the
Exactly, and that's kind of where I'm going. And the problem becomes the illegal side undercuts a lot of things, especially in labor-intensive industries, right? And so it causes problems for those of us that want to do it right when you have to compete with folks who don't.
Big time.
And so it's a huge issue, and it's one that I'm glad that the administration's addressing for a variety of reasons. That's just one of them.
Human
But,
trafficking
you know,
is an ugly business, and it is happening across the United States.
Sure it is. Absolutely it is. And, you know, that's yet another problem with it is when you do have folks that are here illegally, they are simply more likely to end up in an environment where they're trapped because they can't come out of the darkness. And there's a human component to not allowing people to be in those situations.
When something illegal happens to them, then they have nowhere to turn because they know they're going to get arrested and deported as soon as they speak up.
Right. Right.
So hence, it's even better to not have them here, so those type of incidents aren't happening.
Right.
And then you got the crime too. I'm not saying all illegals commit crimes, but the crime rate goes up too on citizens because they're here too.
So we just had 4 Chileans that were illegal immigrants arrested for possibly burglarizing Joe Burrow's house as one
Yeah. And, you
prime
know,
public
and-
example.
And that ought to be the low-hanging fruit in immigration reform, right? Is, you know, okay, you get arrested for something, you're out,
Yeah,
right?
one would
I mean,
think that's
now you
common
get
sense.
into a real interesting question though of, okay, you're illegal, you get arrested, should you be punished for your crime first? You know, like you broke into Joe Burrow's house. Okay, well, if you broke into Joe Burrow's house, you go to jail, right?
Exactly. I'd be
Well,
much more
should you go to jail or should you go to a country who may or may not prosecute you at that point, right? So you get into these weird things, but at the end of the day, that should be the low-hanging fruit, right? You get picked up for a crime, you get sent back kind of deal.
Well, if
So,
they go
yeah.
to jail, I'm still paying for them.
Well, yeah, and that's it, right? And so that kind of becomes the thing, you know,
But
so
if they
it,
don't go to jail, then they're probably gonna come right back and find another way to be here illegally until they get caught again.
so it's,
Vicious.
yeah, it's one of those things, right? Which is why the best thing to do is not have them come in the first place, right? Or you know, create a better.
Exactly.
Now, I will tell you though, too, and I think that this is one of AFP's policy positions as well, is the immigration system really needs a pretty dramatic overhaul. I mean, any of you who have tried to work with folks who are working to immigrate the right way know that it is a wretched system
Yeah.
to try to work with. The delays are tremendous,
Yes.
and frankly, they're so far behind that they're just issuing these letters basically saying, this person has another year, this person's got another 2 years, you know, and it's just not, you know, it's not functioning at all, and it definitely needs cleaning up. Yeah.
Both E-Verify and also House Bill 56, we cut off that money flow and they stopped coming because they have no way to live. And that's the best way to nip that in the bud before it even starts.
Yeah, I can't speak to how we handle the school finance side, but I know that anything else that we do, like you can't get a driver's license if you're here illegally in Kentucky. You can't get benefits if you're here illegally in Kentucky. You know, all those things. I don't know about school enrollment finance. I don't know the answer to that one. But the rest of them, we're pretty strict on financially here in the state. That you have to be here legally and you have to be able to prove it.
Can you think of a book or any other resource that could help remove a little bit more of my naivete about how the world works in government? And I mean that in the sense like, okay, I'll a real quick anecdote. I was hanging with a group out in Arizona called the Oath Keepers years ago. And some of them knew some of the folks up in Oregon. There was this federal land dispute, this, that, and people got hurt. And so they're like, we need to get the feds out of this. Because if you look at the map of the United States and the federal control, right, you move west, western expansion, vast amounts. So I'm like, I get it. I get why you want the feds out. I get, you know, I hear you that the highest law enforcement that you acknowledge is the sheriff's office. But what are you going to do if you had your way? How are you as a state going to function when the federal government annually is giving Arizona, it was like $30-something million in the form of what is the acronym is PILT, Payment in Lieu of Taxes. So in theory, you could use this land that we have our hands on and generate revenues. Let's come up with here you go, and you don't have to lift a finger. So if you had your way, you know, that would be an example. Like, I get that idealism, that what drives that desire, very, very much so, freedom and all that. But in reality, so are the resources like maybe AFP or whatever, something beyond my government? I can't hold legislature, you know.
So let's bring that example a little closer to home. Payment in lieu of taxes, right?
Yeah.
Two quick examples. So start out in West Kentucky, where the power kind of along the southwest border of Kentucky is provided from the Tennessee Valley Authority. So lots of counties in the Commonwealth get a pretty good bit of revenue off of the power generation stations, right? But when the feds own the power generation stations and they own the land and on and on and on, they don't get that. So what happens is TVA makes payments in lieu of down there, right? Where they are in essence the industry that's providing that power. Bebop over to McQuarrie County, right, where you've got a lot of the Daniel Boone National Forest runs through there, which basically pulls that land off of the tax generating rolls, right? If you own land, you pay property taxes on it. The federal government owns land, they don't. So they make payments in lieu of in McQuarrie County. That's a pretty big thing. McQuarrie County does not even actually have an incorporated city inside of it, right? It's the only county in Kentucky without an incorporated city. And so payment in lieu of taxes become a big deal. Now, you get out west, like you said, as we expanded westward, right? The federal government owning this land became a pretty tremendous thing. But so let's use cattle, for example, right? You get grazing rights out in the west to graze your cattle on federal lands, right? What do you think would happen if the feds all of a sudden said, you know, we're going to sell this property? What would happen is the folks with the deepest pockets would buy it up and then charge lease rates that probably would make it unsustainable for a small cattle operation to be able to exist, right? And so you get into some really interesting quandaries as these things occur. Oh my gosh, TJ's going to be better at this stuff than me. He likes to read, you know, books like this more than I do. You know, so I'll tell you, there's interesting and fascinating parallels in anything in history. I'm working my way through one right now. It's called Those Angry Days. It deals with kind of this war between Charles Lindbergh and Franklin Roosevelt in the run-up to World War II. That's a pretty fascinating one with some interesting current historical parallels. Honestly, I like military history. Having been in the Army, having gone to the Citadel, I love military history. So a lot of what I would recommend to you relates to the national security types of questions. Modern politics, what would you read?
Nature of our monetary system, the creatures of Jekyll Island.
Mm-hmm.
It's talking about central banking, fiat currency, the issues behind it, whether it be the economics, the morals, the ethics on it. That's one of the big ones. Anything by Pat Buchanan, fan of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Revolution by Ron Paul. I mean, and frankly, just keeping up with modern politics, it's not as much the books itself as it is just keeping up with various websites that have like news compilers and being able to read from multiple perspectives. So I always read from the Mises Institute, which is more like total free market, libertarian type. I also do the American Conservative, which is more on the paleo-conservative side, more protectionist, less
Right.
on those ends.
I would suggest The Great Deformation. Magnificent,
Okay.
and that one gets way more modern. It gets all the way through at least the bank bailouts, right, that we remember.
Yeah.
That to me, if I was dealing with finance related, I would go with The Great Deformation. Anything, once again, to TJ's point, kind of anything dealing with the Bretton Woods and the abandonment of the gold standard is fairly interesting. But The Great Deformation touches on that, and that would be a good starting point for me.
Yeah, I think there's stuff that I don't even really know exactly what I'm looking for, because I've even seen my evolution of thought go from Mises to maybe, I'd call myself a paleocon now. I wouldn't have before, previously. I remember the day when I thought Ron Paul was kind of crazy. And it turns out the man has such great brilliance and has had such an impact in helping us avert wars. My view on the military, I mean, I bought a lot of that, a lot of that crap after 9/11. I was a believer. I actually went in and joined the reserves, and I won't tell you how old I was, but I was the oldest in my company in basic, or in my group in basic. But it didn't take long before I started to look at it differently. I went, look at all these other things happening behind the scenes. Look at the beneficiaries. And how all of that sort of stuff is invented. It's created crisis for profit and all that. So my views have changed radically in that department. So I don't really know. I guess I just mean like, what I was asking earlier about the potential quid pro quo component to it, Sure. I don't know that somebody's going to necessarily put that in a book. And maybe that's just the sort of thing you learn by doing it, like you're doing it.
Well, sure. Check that one out. That one was really a very good one. I'm sorry it didn't come to my head sooner, but
Great deformation.
yeah, it's really a good one.
On top of that, on the finance side, especially if you're looking at like economic crashes, how they happen, Meltdown by Tom Woods. It's an explanation of the 2008 crash.
Yeah.
That one's, on top of that, just touches on a lot of the same subjects, but it just completely is narrowed to that one top. It's a super easy read. Woods is really good at condensing the communication down,
Yeah.
just on economics and the history therein. Like he's solid.
Like, what are your goals for this year?
Less. Less government is more. I mean, in my opinion. Truthfully, I think a lot of times people become motivated to try to do something, right? And a lot of times when we do something, we end up throwing it back and making life harder on people with small businesses. Let me give you an example. So the Affordable Care Act, for all of its problems and all of its monstrosities, employers have to report to the federal government what they're paying on your behalf for health care now, right? And you actually get an IRS form now. Today I had to write the check to the payroll firm who does the reporting for me. I mean, my little concrete company, I paid over $1,000 just to have my ACA compliance reports submitted. Can you imagine what people are paying around this nation? I mean, it's kind of the old hidden tax thing, right? Yeah. And so a lot of this is, I view the world through the lens of somebody who runs a small business, right? And we don't have room for big HR departments and lawyers and accountants. We have a single office manager who does receivables and payables and the insurance and the thises and the that's and the others. And every time that there's a new government requirement, it adds on to what we're trying to do. And, you know, sometimes things come through and I think, oh, don't let me have voted for that, you know? No, I mean, the biggest thing to me will be this pardon issue, right? And it's a fairly fundamental thing. You know, the primary responsibility of government is justice. And it is a complete perversion of the system when a single person can just wipe out what the justice system was created to do. And so with no recourse, right? It would be one thing if there was at least recourse. Do you stand in front of the voters and say, I did this, right? And so that would be my question, right? I mean, yeah.
On the subject of taxes, the taxes on services, as you just said, any type of regulation causes more work on you. A friend of ours came and cleaned our carpet, and he apologized because he had to add the tax to it. He said, this has caused me so much trouble because I have to do the reports, and this is just a one-guy operation. You know, my husband was a one-guy operation painting contractor, and it causes so much trouble for these small guys. And then on the flip side, a friend of ours owns a car mechanic shop, and I saw the day that you all passed that services would be taxed. She said, get in today or it's going to cost you more tomorrow. You know, $1,000 repair would be $1,060 tomorrow. So, you know, these people that don't have money to begin with, and then they have to dish it out for that's made difficult on the consumer. It's made it difficult on the businesses. I had to pay tax to park at the Arc. I had to pay tax to park.
So you get into the overarching philosophy, right, which is that consumption taxes are a better indicator or a better provider for economic growth than production taxes.
I do agree with that.
And so, yes, so to get into, so in essence, the theory too is you want the taxes to occur at the actual point of final transaction so that people don't end up double taxed. For example, when we go to get gravel from the concrete operation, right? You don't want me to pay tax to pick the gravel up and then you to pay tax to buy the gravel from me, right? There should be a single taxable transaction that occurs. And so that occurs at the consumer level. It does become tough when you do broaden, it's called broadening the base, right? When you do broaden that base, those things become problematic. And it's where you get into these kind of like the land conversation about, you know, federal ownership versus private and things. And so those things are harder. They absolutely are.
Okay.
But it becomes a question of, okay, are we going to try to get this income tax down and put more money so people can decide? And, you know, sometimes those decisions have a lot less flexibility in them. You know, when your car breaks down, you have a lot less flexibility in making the decision than you do to get your carpets cleaned, you know, or to park at the Arc, you know, or whatever the case is, right? But ultimately, that's where the theory lies. And specifically on the maintenance, parts were always taxed, labor was not, right? So it was actually a split bill that you had, and it unified the bill in that particular case. But yeah, I mean,
I'm just relaying what I've heard.
no, I get it. I get it. I completely get it.
What are y'all doing with the pro-life issue right now?
Well, I would argue that we're about as pro-life as you could possibly come. I mean, there's almost no place that has more pro-life protections in the nation than Kentucky at this point. You know, we had that.
I know there's all kind of little things you could be doing. Like, I think Arkansas is one that does a lot of things like that, or had in the past. But I can't remember what they were. But there's, you know, right now, I think it could head the other way if you know, we're lucky we got a super majority that I guess you can't get that on.
Well, Kentucky's pretty cut and dry. I mean, you have to get a erase a supermajority to pass new laws that change it.
Well, except you have one problem. You know, currently there is a lawsuit filed in Jefferson County against some of our things. It will end up in the Supreme Court. It's inevitable that it will end up there. Unfortunately, our former Chief Justice was probably the most conservative member of the court. He retired last term. He was replaced by an exceptionally liberal
Yeah.
justice. And so while we have super majorities in the House and the Senate and the ability to override the governor, our odds are not nearly as good in the Supreme Court. And so we could find ourselves in a place where, you know, we end up backwards. And what you may see is, you know, we got to here, the courts may very well take us to here, and then all we can do is get ourselves back to here, right? Because this just causes us to lose it all again. So I don't know yet. There's people who make a living on this legal analysis of this court's going to do that and this judge is going to do that. I'm not really good with that stuff, but I do know that case is out there right now and it's probably going to become problematic, would be my guess on it.
Do you think we'll see partisan judicial races in Kentucky?
I'm introducing that constitutional amendment next Tuesday.
Yeah. Does it take a constitutional amendment?
It does. There's a constitutional requirement for a nonpartisan judiciary. I haven't introduced a bill to make school board races partisan because there's no
Yes.
constitutional requirement on that. But there is a constitutional requirement of a quote-unquote nonpartisan judiciary, which the courts have interpreted that to mean the elections have to be nonpartisan too. They have used that, by the way, and have gone so far to violate the First Amendment rights of judicial candidates, including Joe Fisher and Bob Winter in 2022. I'm still involved in litigating that case.
Did we not pass a law about this though? Before? No?
For partisan judicial races?
No? Maybe it was you could say your party affiliation, but you can't be on the ballot. That's
Right,
what
well,
it is.
And
That's what it
even
is.
after we got that ruling of the Sixth Circuit in 2016, they still came after judges in 2022 for doing that. We even had them go after judges for simply using the word conservative to describe themselves, which is in itself a judicial philosophy. I mean, we have an out-of-control judicial conduct commission. It's outrageous how badly weaponized it is against Republicans in the judiciary. And the only way I can see it is if they want to act like partisan acts, we treat them like they are in the election cycle.
So I don't know. I mean, my answer was going to be, I think there's a pretty good chance of it. I honestly did not realize that we couldn't do it via legislation, but there you go.
I think TJ's bill, would that be a correct term for it? The one that requires Congress to declare war for Kentucky's reserves to be deployed outside the state. I think that's a good start. These endless wars need to stop. I went on 2 tours over there. I'm all about going, but it seems like it never ends. And then we have soldiers deployed in crazy places like Syria, Jordan, still in Iraq. You know, we stopped giving bombs to the Saudis because we didn't like what they were doing, but now we're doing it for them against the Houthis. You know, just craziness in the last 4 or 5 years, if not longer.
And we'll see how much longer that lasts. I think there's people going to be a lot less willing to be on the wrong side of the United States here in short order.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but when does it end? I mean, we still got troops in Kosovo, and that started in 1999.
I remember that.
Chris, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me. Thanks for your work. Appreciate the help with the campaign, you know, and keep it rolling.
We're on the ground every day in Frankfort, across the state of Kentucky, just pushing for change. My job is to take what our national organization believes are good policy initiatives and try and get them passed in Kentucky. Senator McDaniel, who just spoke, he was endorsed by us because he has voted for a lot of the things that we push. And this year, we're pushing some of the same things we did last year. We've got some new policies. To start, our biggest policy that we want to see passed this year is the REINS Act. Senator McDaniel talked about it a little bit, but it's the regulations of the executive immunity scrutiny. So back in about, we'll say 2015, these numbers aren't exact, we spent between state dollars and federal dollars about $10 billion on Medicaid. Today, we spend about $20 billion a year on Medicaid. What happened between those times is your Republican legislature didn't pass anything that expanded Medicaid, but the governor passed regulations that expanded it. And so that's money coming out of your tax dollars from both the state and a federal level. You're getting double taxed for Medicaid. Things like transgender surgeries for prisoners. That's not a law that allowed that. That was the governor saying, well, I want to pay for this, and so that's what we're going to do.
How can we do that?
Because
I understand executives don't write laws.
they write
Legislatures
regulations.
do.
They write regulations which take the power of law unless the legislature steps in. In Kentucky, we don't have the ability of the legislature to step in yet, and so that's what we're trying to do. The REINS Act, what it would do is it would say any regulation that would have a fiscal impact or cost the taxpayers over $500,000 would have to go back to the legislature for approval. So if Governor Beshear wanted to say that all pizza restaurants have to have this new environmentally friendly pizza oven that costs $200,000, right, to build, and we'll say there are, 6 pizza restaurants across the state that this would affect, right? That would be a $1.2 million fiscal impact. Well, the legislature would have to approve that regulation. All this bill would do, REINS Act, and it hasn't been filed yet, but it will first week back in session on February 4th, is it would say that, Mr. Governor, if you want to spend our tax dollars, you have to get our approval. Now, we don't put it at $0 because he could pass a regulation that says, I don't know, you have to use some certain battery that, costs relatively $2,000 across the state. That doesn't trigger the REINS Act requirement for legislative approval, because if we make the legislature approve every single piece of regulation, what they're going to do is they're going to throw it all into a bill, right? And they're going to pass the bill without looking at it. We want to make sure that they're extremely attentive. So we passed one of these in Kansas, West Virginia, Wisconsin. The federal government has one. Theirs is $100 million. Now think of how much stuff you could sneak under $100 million. In Kentucky, it's $500,000. Last year, that would have caught 5 regulations. Years prior, it would catch anywhere between 10 to 30 regulations a year, and it would require legislative approval for all of them. The goal behind this is to return the power to the people's branch. You just saw Senator McDaniel here. You can email your state representative. TJ's here, right? There are members that are in your community that you can go and talk to a lot more than you can go to the governor's mansion and talk to the governor. The goal is to put it in their hands because they're more accountable to the people. Secondly, one of the core issues of Americans for Prosperity is healthcare accessibility. Something that I don't think in Northern Kentucky you need me to tell you much about, but certificate of need reform. This is a huge issue that we've been pushing in states across the country. We were the main people behind the full repeal that we saw in South Carolina, and we're going to continue to push for it here in Kentucky. We're taking a bit of a different approach this year. Kentucky has a Medicaid rate of people that are on Medicaid that is much higher than the rest of the nation. We're about 37%. We want to cut back on that. We want to make sure that not as many people are on Medicaid. One, it's not costing the taxpayers as much. But 2, relying on the government never works for anyone. I think that as conservatives, we know this. And so we are taking a stab at the services with certificate of need that the federal government has said that we're deficient. That's ambulances. That's chemical dependency or drug rehabilitation, psychiatric care services, dialysis centers, and birthing centers. These 5 areas, we don't even have a birthing center in Kentucky, but since 2009, the federal government has said, you don't have enough beds for these things. The argument from the legislature has been, if we repeal CON, the sky is going to fall. People are going to start dying. I've actually personally been accused of trying to kill people in eastern Kentucky. So, these areas, nobody's going to die, right? We're going to get the data that the legislature so desperately wants, and then we're going to go back in a few years and try and push for more. So far, we've met with the health services chairs in both the House and the Senate. In our first 4 days of session, Americans for Prosperity met with 27 different legislators. And we've seen to get a little bit of movement on ambulances and on birthing centers. The birthing center bill has been filed, and that one is going to be heard in Senate committee on February 5th, the first Health Services Committee back from the break. That's House Bill 90, Senate Bill 76 maybe. But so that's going to be heard by Steve Meredith and his Health Services Committee. We believe it's going to pass. We think that we can get the birthing centers one out of the Senate, and it's been passed by the House 3 years in a row. Ambulances. Kentucky is one of 2 states in the country that have ambulances that are regulated under a certificate of need, us and Hawaii. Now, I don't think a certificate of need should ever be required, but if there was a place that needed one, it would probably be Hawaii, right? Kentucky doesn't. We're not Hawaii. We're not an island, right?
Don't volcanoes.
Yeah, we don't have volcanoes, you're exactly right. This has been an ongoing issue. Mercer County, Kentucky, last year lost their ambulance service. Basically, they came in and said, this isn't profitable, we're leaving. Well, Mercer County is home to Harrodsburg. Harrodsburg is home to Isaiah House, which is the largest drug rehab center in the state. Do you know how many times they called the ambulance on a daily basis? It's like 5 to 10 every day because somebody overdosed. They needed an ambulance to come take somebody to the hospital. Well, they lost their ambulance service. How did that work out? Not good. And so all the other counties had to start filling in. This is something that has been tried before, House Bill 777 from 2022. They made some reforms. We're not seeing it work as well, so we're coming back for the whole thing. And we've gotten sign off from the House Health Services Chair, Representative Mosier, on this. Senator Steve Meredith seems to be okay with it, Senate Health Services Chair, and so we're going to try and push for this reform this year.
What did you say Mosier was willing to support? What was it again?
Ambulance EMS.
Just the ambulance.
Yeah. Yep. Though we are working with both Health Services Committee to draw back on Medicaid reform. I think if somebody had asked Senator McDaniel the question, but what is going to bankrupt the state of Kentucky, it's going to be the amount that we spend on Medicaid. It just continues to grow and grow and grow.
Well,
Yes.
I'm all for ending mandatory charity. I mean, charity at gunpoint is not truly charity.
I would agree.
Can I ask you how you're going to accomplish this? So it's 37% currently?
Yeah, it's 37%. That's something we're currently looking into. The issue with Medicaid is we could cut it back everything tomorrow. We're going to get sued. It's going to end up in the court system, and we're likely going to lose.
Because you know what's kind of maybe ironic is that you get a lot more support, it sounds like. Did you watch the certificate of need hearings?
I was at all of them.
All of them? Good,
Yeah.
good.
God.
Yeah, I was at every single one.
Yeah, good. So ironically, maybe, if there was success in that regard, it actually undermines, well, maybe that's not the proper word. I think you'd get more support from rural conservatives for larger certificate of need reform if they weren't so reliant
Exactly.
on those payments, something
Yeah.
like 80%.
Exactly.
So then they heavily depend on those profitable services and
Yep.
can't, and if it slips away, compromising the integrity of the only health care
Yep.
that those people have.
And that's the argument they make, right?
Right.
And that's part of the goal, is to cut back on it. I am not, Medicaid has become something that over the last 2 weeks has become, AFP has always pushed for Medicaid reform. It's something that in state that we have realized that's going to be the next big push that we have to make. And so I'm currently reading up on it more, but I know that the legislature is reticent to get on it. I know that it's one of President Stiver's biggest concerns. I know that Senator McDaniel, it's one of his biggest concerns. Like, you know, we've cut the income tax from 6% down to 3.5%, but will be 3.5%. They can continue to do that, but if the governor keeps spending money and spending money and spending money, it's going to do nothing. Part of that is the REINS Act, right? The REINS Act will be able to stop it in its tracks from going further. We now have to come back and cut what's already been expanded. And that's kind of the next step on it.
What type of reform are you talking about on the Medicaid?
I have to look into it more. Yes. Yeah, like I said, this is a new issue to me, 2 weeks ago kind of thing, that it was brought really to our attention. And so that's something that we're studying. We're hoping to be involved in the conversations as it comes. Sadly, I'm not an expert on every single issue. I'm trying to get there.
What's wrong with you?
I know.
I was just curious. Is this healthcare related or?
No, it's everything.
What about electric cars?
Electric cars, EV mandates. So AFP is generally against all types of government mandates. I know that President Trump just repealed the disastrous EV mandate that came from the Biden administration.
I heard that. I just want to make sure it's going down to Kentucky.
Yeah. So yes, that will. I don't believe Kentucky has any EV mandates as of now.
California doesn't build gas stations. Why should it build EV?
Well, when it
chargers?
does build EV chargers, they spend $5 billion to build 2 of them
Right.
in an 8-year period, right? Whatever that number is. Yeah, it's an absurdity. We were supportive of that repeal of Biden's executive order on a national level. On a national level, our biggest issue this year is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is set to expire. 2017 it passed. The average household saved $1,500 in taxes. January 1 of next year, you will owe $1,500 more in taxes if they don't extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and that's what we're working on federally. Licensing reform was brought up. We are for anything that makes licensing easier in the state. Kentucky is bottom 5 when it comes to licensing occupations. I think we licensed 221, maybe 211, one of those occupations in the state of Kentucky. On average, it's over 400 hours that you have to take of training in order to get your license, and there are 38 of those occupations that are specific only to Kentucky. For instance, if you want to sell headstones for a graveyard, you have to have a license in the state of Kentucky. I didn't know that, but yes, you do. And so anything that we can do to cut that back would be great. I believe Representative Doan filed a bill this year.
House Bill 133.
Yes, House Bill 133. That would basically say, screw the interstate compacts, we're just accepting everyone. Is that correct?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Why co-sponsored it?
Yeah. And I would say we're generally supportive of that. Another bill that will likely be filed, international physician reciprocity. We'll say you're the #1 neurosurgeon in Switzerland, and you come to Kentucky. You basically have to go through all the schooling again. You have to go through all the licensing again to be able to practice medicine. What this bill would do is it would allow for all hospitals. Right now, the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville have the ability to take these doctors, bring them over to the United States, get them immigration status, and then employ them as professors, and then they can practice medicine. They get a provisional license. What this would do is it would say, well, we're not just going to single out our university research institutions, but a rural hospital could do the exact same thing. They could take a doctor that's already here, that's already legally immigrated here, right, and make sure that they have an actual license to practice medicine, they know how to do it, but they get a provisional license for 5 years to operate under, a hospital, a rural health clinic, things like that. And this would hopefully help solve one of the healthcare shortages that we have. 14% of the doctors in Kentucky are in rural Kentucky, 44% of the population is there. And that's something that, along with certificate of need, that we have to be able to solve, is how do we get staffing in those parts of the state, and we think this would be helpful in that. Beyond that, really any regulatory reform we can do. So we're in Crestview Hills right now, right?
Yes.
No offense to the city of Crestview Hills, but I personally believe that kids should be able to have lemonade stands without government interference. There's this group called the Youth Entrepreneurs. A few months ago, they asked to do a market in Crestview Hills. The Youth Entrepreneurs, basically for kids between the ages of 8 and 18, can come sell lemonade, friendship bracelets, cottage foods that are already legal under the state health code to be made at home. They can't grill you a steak and sell it to you, or make you, something that would require a health license. Well, the city of Crestview Hills told them no, because every single child that had a booth at the market would require an occupational license. They would also be required to pay taxes.
How do they not feel embarrassed when they
I understand. And
Don't they have Girl Scout cookies?
yeah, they're fine, because that's our profit, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So we have a bill that we're looking to file. I call it the lemonade stand bill, but it's called the Infrequent Business of Minors Act. And basically what it says is if you're under the age of 18 and you have a business, you can make up to $10,000 a year. You don't require a license, you don't have to pay income tax. So when I was a kid, I used to go out and shovel snow. If we got 2 good snow days, I would make $3,000. This would say that we're not going to duly unburden children who are trying to make a buck. Entrepreneurship is good, and we shouldn't disincentivize them from it. Representative Banta, who is from Northern Kentucky, is looking at filing that for us. So I have to go back and make sure she's good with it. But she displayed an interest in that, and I think that's something that would do great in state. Arizona passed it. I believe that the Democrats actually argued with the kids that they had come testify in Arizona. Yeah. They had like an 8-year-old testifying, and a Democrat started arguing with them in the committee room. Beyond that, we're looking at anything that's filed that can really help get government out of your lives. The idea behind Americans for Prosperity is that we believe that that the world is made up of kind of 4 pillars. You've got government, you've got community, you've got principled entrepreneurship or businesses, and education, right? We think that community your church is, the community groups you're part of, the education in your schools and everything like that. Businesses are better suited to fix your everyday problems than government is. And so anything that we can do to remove the barriers that government places in front of you as citizens in the Commonwealth and allow you to unleash your own prosperity is what our goal is. And so that's kind of our legislative agenda. I'd be happy to take any questions.
So how are you organized? 501c3 for?
We are a 501c4. We have a 501c3 and we have a 527. We believe, and we'll defend it to I don't know who they are, but we'll defend it to the day that we die, that who you donate to is your own business. Just as if you were to give to a church, you shouldn't have to say publicly that you gave to your church. It's a free speech issue.
So I was only with American for Prosperity for 4 weeks last year for Chris McDaniel. How does it work about, like, when did we go back out there? Do we have to have somebody that we actually, like, support? Like
Yeah.
How does that work with, like, the time of year and everything? Like, just kind of go into that a little bit.
So it depends on when we decide to engage. We don't just engage in elections. We engage on policy issues as well. So really, there's one representative standing in the way, right? They're the one vote that's not allowing us to do it. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to start, we're going to go meet with them. If they're not going to budge, well, then we're probably going to send some phone calls to their office. And if they don't budge, that's when we will go out and knock on doors in their district until they budge. And if they don't budge after that, then we'll probably run somebody against them, right? So that's we'll see what happens. The other side of it is Representative Roberts files a tax cut bill, and we like him very much. And so we're going to run people in his district to say thank you. So I would say in the next few months, we're going to have those opportunities where if we have really good legislators who we want to thank, we will have people knock doors in their district and say, you should thank your legislator for doing this, or you should call your legislator and ask them not to do this. And that's kind of the next step of it. And then we come around to 2026 now, wow, I'm getting old, where we will engage in elections again, right? This is something that I'm very excited about, and I haven't had full approval for it, but it's something that we're looking to get involved in. The last kind of part of this state that is standing in the way of everything that we want to do is the Supreme Court. We are looking to engage in Supreme Court elections for the first time in 2026. We've done it in Wisconsin and seen some good success with it. Not only do we support things that give voters more information, like partisan judicial races, but we want to make sure that we have people on the bench that not only have a good judicial philosophy, but aren't politicized. They're going to rule with us when we're right and rule against us when we're wrong. Right now, we have people on the bench that will rule against us when we're right and wrong, and we can't have that anymore. Any other questions?
School choice.
School choice. It's an interesting one.
Yeah. How was that records request?
So I may have submitted more open records requests last year than any other person in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I know that T.J. submitted an open records request and saw one of my open records requests when he submitted it. So we're actually still going through the data because not all the districts have complied. Basically, what we did was we submitted a request with every district in the state for their, I forget what they're called, vendor payments. And what we were looking at is, for instance, the Kentucky School Board Association. Well, the school itself could not engage on the amendment. The Kentucky School Board Association could. And what we saw is over, we'll say 2020 when there wasn't an amendment fight, Jefferson County Public Schools gave them $10,000, just making up these numbers. 2021 and 2022, $10,000. 23, $15,000. 24, $120,000, right? And so that's what we're looking at and looking into. We can't say that money went to fight the amendment because, again, the School Board Association is like a quasi-governmental but private institution. Where I think we're going to go from here is one, I don't know if you all saw Corey DeAngelo sued Pulaski County School Districts. I understand that the Liberty and Justice Center is looking to possibly engage against other school districts in the state, in both state and federal court. That was something I went down when Owensboro Public Schools did their little school board meeting where they told you couldn't wear a t-shirt and couldn't comment on their post. I was there wearing my t-shirt and I was like, please arrest me. Like I wanted to get arrested. I think I called TJ before it too. I was like, hey, am I right here? But, you know.
You just breached it, and you also just waived attorney-client privilege on that issue.
That's fine, that's fine. But so there's going to be some accountability in school choice. Not only that, I think we're going to continue to move forward. One thing that we're looking for this session, I don't necessarily know if it's been filed or not, but open enrollment. The idea that, you know, if you live in Jefferson County, you want to go to Oldham County Public Schools, you shouldn't be charged for that. Making that easier. And so there's going to be a bill filed this session that will move open enrollment to be better. I know Ohio passed something last session. Beyond that, I think that this case that the Young Voices or Student Voice team filed, it's very interesting. They filed Rose 2.0, they call it. Basically, the last Rose case that was decided by the Kentucky Supreme Court said that there wasn't equitable funding in executive education. They basically made the legislature go back and refund everything, increase funding, and make sure that public schools were properly funded. The issue is if they go back and touch funding, and the Supreme Court says, well, we don't believe that the funding is equitable, you have to go back and redo it. What they're saying is that the current system is inequitable. Well, Philip Shepard's decision, the Franklin Circuit judge, in the charter schools case, basically defined what a common school was under our Constitution as a school that has to accept everyone. Craft Academy, Gatton Academy, the Kentucky School for the Blind, the Kentucky School for the Deaf. My mother is a principal at JCPS. Her school, which is for kids with special needs, they don't accept everyone, but they get state funding. Well, the Supreme Court wants to go back and say, hey, you're not funding equitably. They're basically leaving the decision of how to define a common school up to the legislature. And we would hope that the legislature would act to make sure that charter schools are legal. I think the other part of that is I think the Supreme Court has a really interesting question of, do they want to say that male traditional high school in Louisville is unconstitutional? Do they want to shut down Manual and JCPS because they don't accept every student? Because they're going to have to uphold Philip Shepard's ruling throughout this charter school case. They're going to have to uphold that the Kentucky School for the Blind cannot receive state funding because I, as a seeing individual, can't go there and can't send my children there. And if they do that, if they uphold Philip Shepard's ruling, they're going to have hell to pay when the next election comes. Or if they just let us have charter schools, which are common schools in every other state that they're in. But we're not going to stop fighting on school choice.